From the very day Olga and Sergei brought their newborn son, Artem, home from the hospital, something changed in their East European shepherd, Bars. The big, powerful dog simply stopped sleeping. Every single night, without fail, he would lie down right beside Artem's crib, his intelligent eyes fixed on the tiny infant. Even when the house was silent and everyone else had drifted off to sleep, Bars remained a vigilant statue. His ears stayed pricked, listening for the slightest sound, and his breathing was heavy, almost anxious. At first, Olga thought it might be a touch of jealousy. It made sense, right? A new baby comes into the home, suddenly demanding all the attention. But as she watched Bars more closely, she realized that wasn't it. There was no anger in his gaze, no fear or resentment. It was something else entirely, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It was as if Bars knew something was going to happen that night, a secret only he was privy to. Olga loved watching the tender moments between them. She'd often see Bars gently rest his massive head on the edge of the crib, his whole body still as he listened to little Artem's soft, rhythmic breathing. It was so touching, a beautiful picture of a loyal dog guarding a child. She would smile, her heart filled with warmth. But over the last few days, that touching picture started to feel strange. Bars's vigilance had intensified. He refused to leave the baby's side, not even for a minute. When Olga tried to coax him out for a walk or to eat, he would let out a soft, low growl, almost a whisper, but it was firm. He was not moving. One night, the silence of the house was broken. It was around 3 a.m. when the baby monitor on Olga's nightstand crackled to life. She was jolted awake not by the monitor, but by loud, frantic barking. It was Bars. She could see him on the small screen, standing stiffly by the crib. The fur on his back, his hackles, were raised. His eyes, even on the grainy monitor, seemed to burn with a desperate worry. "Bars, quiet," Olga whispered, trying not to wake her husband. "Shh, you'll wake the baby." She got out of bed, her heart pounding from the sudden alarm. As she tiptoed into the nursery, a cold dread began to creep up her spine. The room was eerily silent, apart from Bars's continued anxious panting. Then she looked into the crib and saw it. Artem wasn't moving. His little chest, which should have been gently rising and falling, was completely still. The world seemed to stop. Time itself froze. Olga threw off her drowsiness like a heavy blanket and rushed to her son. She reached in, her hand trembling, and touched his skin. It was cool. There was no sound, no breath, nothing. "No, no, no," she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. She scooped the limp body of her baby into her arms, pressing him tightly to her chest as her body shook with uncontrollable sobs. Bars whined pitifully, nudging the baby with his nose, licking his tiny face, as if he was begging, "Do something, please do something." Just then, Sergei burst into the room, phone already in hand, his face a mask of terror. He was dialing 112, the emergency number, his fingers fumbling in his haste. He laid Artem on the floor and, following the operator's instructions, began giving the baby mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Olga knelt beside them, praying, begging, making deals with any higher power that would listen. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Each second was a lifetime of agony. Bars paced frantically between them, letting out sharp barks, his panic mirroring their own. And then, a sound. A faint, barely audible gasp. It was followed by a weak, fluttering breath, and then another. Suddenly, Artem let out a cry. A real, living, breathing cry. It was the most beautiful sound Olga had ever heard. She collapsed to the floor, pulling Artem into her arms, and Bars immediately sank down beside her, resting his heavy head on her lap, his body finally relaxing. In that moment, Olga knew. This wasn't just a dog. This was a guardian. He had sensed it. He knew what was happening long before anyone else, even before the baby monitor did. The ambulance arrived just minutes later. Paramedics rushed in and quickly began checking the baby's vitals. his pulse, his breathing, his oxygen levels. One of the medics turned to Olga, his expression grave. "Your baby had an apnea episode," he explained gently. "It's a condition where an infant temporarily stops breathing in their sleep. It can be very dangerous." Olga felt the blood drain from her face. Apnea. She had heard of it, but never thought it would happen to her child. "But how did Bars know?" she asked, her voice shaking. "He couldn't have known." The doctor looked over at the big shepherd, who was still pressed against Olga's side, watching the medics with wary eyes. He shrugged. "It's hard to say for sure," he said, "but some animals, especially dogs, have an incredible sense of smell and hearing. It's possible he detected a subtle change in the baby's breathing pattern, or even a change in scent associated with the drop in oxygen levels." From that day forward, everything was different. The bond between Artem and Bars became the stuff of family legend. Bars was no longer just the family pet. He was Artem's protector, his furry guardian angel. He still slept by the crib, but the frantic anxiety was gone, replaced by a calm, confident watchfulness. And Olga and Sergei never again questioned the instincts of their incredible dog. They knew they owed their son's life to the dog that never let the child sleep alone. This story is a powerful reminder that the animals we share our lives with are often more perceptive and intuitive than we can ever imagine. Their love and loyalty can manifest in the most extraordinary ways, sometimes even saving a life. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories. We'll see you in the next video. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a story that truly shows how some bonds are simply meant to be. A story about a family, a baby boy, and the four-legged hero who became his guardian angel. It all started with a feeling of dread, a premonition of trouble that Olga just couldn't shake. She looked over at Bars, their dog. He was slumped against the wall, panting heavily, looking as if he'd just run a marathon. Just moments before, the house had been filled with the terrifying silence of a baby who wasn't breathing. Now, with her son Artem safe, the doctor who had rushed to their side smiled, exhausted but relieved. "You owe your son's life to him," he said, gesturing toward Bars. The dog had alerted them, his frantic barking shattering the quiet and saving Artem from a near-fatal case of sudden infant apnea. That night, long after the chaos subsided and the house was quiet again, Olga couldn't sleep. She found herself on the floor next to Bars, her hand lost in his thick, warm fur. "You saved my Artem," she whispered, tears tracing paths down her cheeks. Bars let out a soft sigh and rested his big head on her knees, his silent response seeming to say, "I just did what I had to." From that moment on, Bars never left the side of Artem's crib. He became a furry, ever-present shadow. Olga, terrified of a repeat incident, had a state-of-the-art breathing monitor installed. She would watch the tiny light on the machine, her own breathing hitched until she saw it flash with each of Artem's inhalations. But even with the technology, her true sense of calm came from something else. In the dim glow of the nursery, it was the sight of Bars' watchful eyes that truly soothed her frayed nerves. In a strange, almost unbelievable way, Bars seemed to know before the machine did. Sometimes he'd lift his head, a low rumble in his chest, a split second before the monitor's alarm would pierce the silence. A week went by, a tense, watchful week. Then, one night, it happened again. The sharp, dreaded beep of the alarm. But Bars was already moving. He sprang up, nudging Olga's face with his cold, wet nose, pushing her, urging her awake. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she bolted to her son's side. It was apnea again. The monitor had worked, but Bars had reacted faster. He was more than just a pet. He was a living, breathing, early warning system. When they spoke to the doctor about it, he was astonished. He confirmed that Bars's reaction was unique, almost unheard of. It wasn't just that he sensed danger. He seemed to sense the very instant Artem's breathing stopped. After that, things changed in the nursery. Olga went out and bought a small, plush dog bed. She chose a soft blanket and a little pillow herself and placed them right beside the crib. "This is your spot now, Bars," she told him, her voice thick with emotion. "You're his guardian angel." And so he was. Every night, Bars would curl up in his new bed, his eyes blinking slowly in the darkness, a comforting, almost human-like presence. The soft rhythm of his breathing became the new sound of peace in their home. Even Olga's husband, Sergei, who had always been a skeptic, finally admitted he was no longer terrified for their son. Not as long as Bars was there. One morning, as Olga was making tea, Sergei spoke quietly from the doorway. "You know," he said, "I never really believed animals could be like this." Olga smiled, her gaze drifting toward the nursery, where the sound of her baby's soft snores mingled with the steady, reassuring breaths of the dog. "Now I believe everything, Sergei," she replied, "even in miracles." The months passed, and with each day, Artem grew stronger. His smiles became more frequent, his laughter echoing through the house. His breathing evened out, becoming steady and calm. Yet Bars's vigil never wavered. He remained by the crib, a steadfast sentry, as if he didn't quite trust the air itself to do its job. Their mornings developed a beautiful ritual. Olga would peek through the cracked door of the nursery and see Bars gently nudging Artem's tiny hand with his nose. The baby would giggle, his small fingers reaching out to grab a fistful of fur. It was the first touch of the day, a greeting between a boy and his protector. One afternoon, Olga left Artem with Sergei to run to the store. When she returned, she was met with a sound that sent a chill down her spine, a low, guttural growl coming from the hallway. There stood Bars, planted firmly in front of the bedroom door, his body rigid, the fur on his back bristled. He was on high alert. "Bars, what's wrong?" Olga asked, her voice trembling slightly. He turned his head just enough to look at her, his ears flat against his skull, his eyes filled with a desperate anxiety. Olga's heart leaped into her throat, and she rushed past him into the room. The bedroom window was wide open, the curtain dancing in a sudden gust of wind. And there, on the very edge of the bed, was Artem. He had wriggled himself to the precipice and was moments from falling, but he hadn't fallen, because Bars was there. The dog had wedged himself against the bed, his paw carefully pinning the blanket, creating a barrier that kept the baby safe. "Oh my God," Olga whispered, fresh tears blurring her vision. He had saved him again. He wasn't a trained rescue dog. He wasn't acting like a hero from a movie. He was just Bars, and for him, protecting Artem was as natural as breathing. After that day, Olga stopped being surprised. Bars's guardianship simply became a fact of their lives. When Artem started to crawl, Bars was his constant shadow, trailing him from room to room. He'd sleep patiently outside the bathroom door during bath time and sit loyally by the high chair during meals, waiting for dropped bits of food. If Artem laughed, Bars's tail would thump a happy rhythm against the floor. If Artem cried, Bars would lie down close, touching the baby's tear-streaked cheek with his cool nose. They were an inseparable pair, a boy and his dog, linked by an unspoken, unbreakable bond. But the full story, the mystery of Bars's devotion, had one final chapter left to be revealed. One day, while tidying up, Olga came across an old drawer filled with Bars's puppy things, a chewed-up toy, his first collar, and the worn papers from the shelter where they had found him. As she picked up the old leather collar, her fingers brushed against something rough on the inside. She held it up to the light. There, almost completely worn away by time and wear, was a faint engraving. The letters were tiny and hard to make out, but as she squinted, her breath caught in her throat. She could just make out a few words. And what those words said would change everything she thought she knew about their incredible dog. But that's a story for another time. Thanks so much for watching. What do you think was engraved on the collar? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories. We'll see you in the next one. His collar tag read, Bars, assist. The translation was simple: a service dog for infant loss support. Olga froze. She immediately called the shelter. The woman on the other end spoke softly. Yes, Bars came to us after his owner lost a baby. He tried to wake her, but it was too late. After that, he trusted no one except infants. They reminded him of the one he couldn't save. Olga sat on the floor, the dog's collar in her hand. A tightness gripped her chest. She looked over at Bars, fast asleep by her son Artem's crib. "Quiet, calm," she whispered. "You're not just guarding Artem, you're healing yourself." The thought pierced her. That evening, she sat on the floor beside Bars for a long time, stroking his thick fur, feeling the heart beneath her palm that remembered pain, yet had learned to love again. After that call, Olga couldn't calm down. Pain, gratitude, and a strange kind of guilt swirled in her heart. She realized Bars wasn't just protecting Artem. Every single day, he was fighting his own past trauma, reliving the memory of the night he felt he had failed. From that evening on, a special, unspoken bond formed between them. Olga began to treat Bars not as a pet, but as an equal, a member of the family who had seen just as much as they had. She started talking to him like a person, sharing thoughts she was too afraid to voice out loud to anyone else. "Sometimes, Bars," she'd whisper by the crib late at night, "I think you feel more than many people do. You know he's not just a child, don't you? He's your second chance, a chance to save what was once taken from you." Bars would listen, motionless, only blinking his large, intelligent eyes slowly, as if he understood and agreed with every word. More months flew by. Soon, Artem was learning to walk. His very first shaky steps were taken while holding on to Bars' warm, sturdy fur for balance. Olga filmed it all on her phone, laughing through tears of joy. "Look, Bars! He's coming to you!" she shouted, clapping her hands. Bars stood perfectly still, a pillar of patience, and when the toddler finally reached his muzzle, he gently licked the boy's nose, as if giving him a blessing. But then came the night that changed everything. A violent storm raged outside. Wind hammered against the windows, and the old house seemed to shake on its foundation. Olga and her husband Sergei went to bed, assuming Bars would stay by Artem's crib as he always did. But around 3 in the morning, something woke Olga. A strange, unnatural silence had fallen over the house. There was no sound from the nursery, no soft breathing, no quiet whimpers, and most alarmingly, no gentle woof from Bars. She jumped out of bed and ran to Artem's room. The door was slightly ajar. Bars stood just inside, panting heavily. Beside him, Artem sat on the floor in his little pajamas, his eyes wide with fear. The boy was trembling. On the floor nearby lay a pile of shattered glass. And just outside on the windowsill, a muddy shoe print was clearly visible. Someone had tried to break in. A low growl rumbled from Bars, so deep the very air seemed to vibrate. Just as Sergei ran into the room, he saw Bars lunge toward the open window. His teeth clamped down on a dark sleeve, and he dragged a figure down from the sill. A scream and a heavy thud echoed from outside. Seconds later, Bars was back inside. A little blood dripped from his muzzle, but his eyes were calm, his duty done. Olga clutched Artem tightly while Sergei called the police. When the chaos finally subsided, they learned that a thief had been hitting several homes in their neighborhood that night. Without Bars, Artem would have been in terrible danger. Later, after the patrol car had left, Olga sat on the floor with Bars, gently cradling his big head in her hands. "You saved him again," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You didn't let anyone take what you once lost." Bars simply laid his head on her lap. There was no pride in his eyes, only a deep, quiet weariness. In that moment, Olga understood. He had finally found his peace. He had kept his promise. The next morning, Bars slept beside Artem's crib longer than usual. His breathing was even and calm, as if for the first time in years, He was truly and deeply at rest. After that night, life in the house changed. The silence was no longer anxious, it was sacred. It felt as if the very walls had absorbed their gratitude. Bars became a neighborhood legend. Neighbors would visit, bringing him treats and patting his noble head. Olga would just smile and say, "He's not a hero, he just loves." Time passed, and Bars began to age. His steps grew slower, and his muzzle turned a distinguished gray. Yet he never once left Artem's side. The boy, now nearly 4, was learning to speak in full sentences, and every single morning began the same way. "Good morning, Bars," he would say, hugging the dog's thick neck. Bars would answer with a soft sigh and a slow wag of his tail. Olga often watched them, her heart filled with a bittersweet mix of tenderness and sorrow. She knew Bars wasn't eternal, that one day she would have to explain to Artem where souls as pure as his go. One evening, Bars didn't come to his usual spot by the crib. Olga found him in the living room. He was lying on the rug, his head on his paws, his eyes half open. "Hey, old man," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Are you tired?" Bars slowly lifted his gaze. His breathing was weak, but his eyes were completely calm. She called for Artem. The little boy came and sat down, stroking the dog's head. "Mama, is he sleeping?" he whispered. Olga bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears. "Yes, baby. He's just resting." Artem laid his head on the soft fur and whispered, "Thank you, Bars." Bars took one last, quiet breath. It was peaceful, calm. Olga pulled him close, tears now streaming down her face. There was no fear, only endless, overwhelming gratitude. They buried him under the big oak tree in the garden, where he had loved to watch the sunsets. Artem placed his small toy, a blue plush bear, beside him in the earth. "So, he won't be lonely," he said simply. That evening, Olga sat by the window for a long time, staring out at the oak tree. The wind seemed to whisper something soft and warm, like the breath of an old friend who had finally found peace. Years passed, the house filled with new sounds, the laughter of more children, music, the general rustle of a full life. Artem grew up, became a schoolboy. In his room, a photo always hung on the wall, a tiny him hugging a huge German shepherd. Beneath it, in a child's scrawl, it said, "My best friend." Every night before bed, Artem would close his window and whisper into the darkness, "Good night, Bars." And sometimes, Olga thought the wind would answer with a rustle of leaves that sounded just like a heavy dog's breath. In the garden under the oak tree, flowers grew. Birds came every spring. Whenever Artem played nearby, he would say, "Mama, Bars is with me today. He sees everything." Olga would smile, her eyes tearing up. She knew that souls like his don't just vanish. They linger in the scent of old fur on a blanket, in the warmth of the morning sun, in every single breath of the child they saved. One day, Artem asked her, "Mama, was Bars an angel?" She answered without a moment's hesitation. Yes, he was. He just didn't have wings. But he had a heart as big as the sky." That night, as moonlight lit up the old oak tree, Olga felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Maybe it was because she knew, deep down, that someone was still guarding their home. Not out of duty, not for a reward, but simply because love, true love, is eternal. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more.